So just to introduce myself, I'm Arina, and thank you for joining us today to explore the aspect of decolonization in higher education. So today's paper is titled "Decolonization is Not Even a Footnote" on the dominant ideologies and smokescreens in South African higher education. And allow me to introduce our guests who are going to share their work with us. I will just go through their bio. So today we have Dr. Savo Heleta. Savo Heleta is a researcher and educator with more than 10 years experience in higher education, academic research, curriculum development, teaching, research supervision, and internationalization in South Africa. His research focuses on decolonization of knowledge, higher education internationalization, international research collaboration, higher education policy, analysis of foreign aid flows to higher education, and rebuilding higher education after violent conflict. He has also worked on post-war peace building and youth leadership development projects in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1998 to 2002, and post-war capacity building and leadership development in South Sudan. He's the survivor of the Bosnian War, and he's the author of Not My Turn to Die, Memoirs of a Broken Childhood, Bosnia. We also have Isha Dilraj, who is an education researcher and activist committed to advancing social justice awareness and action, particularly in cultivating a fair and transformative educational landscape for marginalized communities. She's the Global Engagement Project Manager within Global Strategy and Visibility at the University of Cape Town, and is the doctoral candidate within the UCT School of Education. With over a decade of experience in higher education, academia, research, policy formulation and implementation, project management, strategic leadership, and staff, student and system development. Her current research is broadly focused on the political economy of higher education. Passionate about social justice issues pertaining to education, decolonization, and gender equity debates, her research interest and scholar work critically engages education policy, higher education, education and conflict, internationalization and partnerships, and theories of power, violence, resistance, and decolonization. And then we'll have our discussant with Prof. Mlamuli Hlatshwayo from the University of Johannesburg. So this is how our session will unfold. So we'll give 25 to 30 minutes to our presenters. Thereafter, our discussant will reflect on their paper for 10 minutes, and then I will open the floor for Q&A. Over to you, Dr. Savo and Isha.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think you are able to see the slides here. I'd like to thank you for organizing this, for inviting us. It's really great. It's a great opportunity to speak about this paper. It's something Isha and I have been working on for quite some time last year, and I think it was a very important project. And before the session started, we were chatting about it just before 10 minutes ago, and I was telling Isha and Mlamuli that I read a paper now again this morning, kind of in preparation for this, to remind myself of the details, and I feel it's a very important topic, and I think it's a very important topic in this year. The paper was published last year and was part of a special issue that Mlamuli co-edited, looking at decolonization in higher education, not only in South Africa but in the global South. And being the 10th anniversary of Rhodes Must Fall, this paper in part reads as kind of a reflection of what has happened in the decade, since the roads must fall and fees must fall. Some of the achievements, as well as many of the, let's call them broken promises, and we'll come back to that as we talk about all this. Isha, I don't know if you want to go to the next slide. I can maybe just reflect on what we're going to be talking about. Before I talk about what we're going to talk about in here, I just wanted to mention, so when we were preparing the slides for another presentation, it was also, I think, in Free State last year, and Isha has presented this paper before for the two of us. I remember she was asking me, do I have any visuals to share? And I don't think she was expecting the visuals that I sent her. I have this huge collection on my phone and we have a number of them here. Screenshots of various tweets, people posting about decolonization, and this was one of them. And I think it is such a good kind of reflection in terms of our own title. We talk about the smokescreens. We in the paper talk about the decolonial washing. We talk about the epistemic decolonization becoming not more than a buzzword, not more than something that universities are taking on to sugarcoat what really is a crucial, I would say, existential topic, not just for the universities, but for the formerly colonized societies as well. And yeah, so that's one of the, I wanted to just note that I don't want us to just have this day and not mention it. And I think when colleagues write about decolonial washing, in many ways, this image represents kind of like what people were hoping for, more progressive scholars and students, what they were hoping for to see, and then what we see from the universities, kind of as an outcome, if they even care to do something kind of like, just to use it as a buzzword, because at many institutions currently, I don't even see, anything, basically anything. And we don't see it from the government as well. And we'll come to that in a moment. So yeah, what we're going to talk about here today is really just some of the key sections of the paper. And what we're also going to try to do is not just give you everything that is in the paper. We'll try to finish this in about 20-25 minutes so that we have more time for Mlamuli to respond, as well as to have some questions, hopefully, that we can engage. For me, that is the most kind of important part, when we engage and ask questions to each other and all that. But these are broadly the key areas in the paper itself. I mean, we hope people will read the paper and engage with it. We hope people will also read the special issue, and there's some very important other papers in that special issue as well. So yeah, I don't want to talk more in this section. I hope we can, engage on this and continue to engage on these very important issues. And I'm looking forward to this, engagement throughout the next 50 minutes.
Thanks, Savo. Afternoon, colleagues. Thank you so much for the invitation. As Savo said, this paper was born from, I think, a lot of frustration that we felt with what has been happening in the university space. Our frustrations with just voices not being heard, resistance being met with resistance. And interestingly enough, Savo and I actually had to go to London, and we met at a higher education conference in conflict in London. And that's when we started chatting about what's happening in South Africa and the work that we do here. And I think this paper is sort of a culmination of all this, the frustrations. We did a podcast speaking about the changing nature of the university, where we looked at what resistance means, how neoliberalism was playing out. And I think the main question for us, the thing that we've been struggling with, is what does decolonization mean? And why are we still struggling to change in this current climate? And I think in this paper, we tease out this thought process. So we go through a variety of thought processes and play out what it is that we're struggling with. So I think I'm just going to pull out some of the things that we speak about in the paper. So Essentially, we critically interrogate two dominant ideologies, the Rainbow Nation and neoliberalism. And we look at how both combined have sidelined fundamental transformation and epistemic decolonization in South Africa. Savo's going to dive into the HEHD strategic plan for 2020 and 2025, and we're going to show how the government's role in actually not prioritizing decolonization is why the universities are also not taking this as seriously. We argue that there's a lack of political will and policy alignment, and that's further entrenching coloniality, Eurocentricity, the neoliberal logics. And I think despite us diving into why this is happening, we also wanted to talk about critically engaging with this. So what is the role, or how has universities historically propagated and supported colonialism and apartheid? And we also want to offer ideas of how we resist and speak back to this. So we'll present an idea a little bit later on about Walsh's idea of chipping at the cracks and the fissures in the system, and how resistance is extremely important in us speaking back to the challenges that we're currently facing. So I'm just gonna very, very quickly, before I hand over to Savo again to speak a bit about the Rainbow Nation, I'm going to sort of set the scene for us by looking at what's happening in the largely untransformed university sector right now. So the first thing we do in the paper is we provide this historical context where the colonial and apartheid legacies and structures continue to shape and influence the university, the knowledges it produces, the education it provides to students, and the inherent cultures and environments that subjugate, extract, erase, exclude, isolate, oppress. And I think many of us who exist in these spaces can testify to this. So when we look at the university today, yes, I mean, a lot of questions have been posed to us, but yes, there has been transformation. And we do want to agree, yes, many strides have been made and the shifts are visible. But what we've actually done is we've equated transformation to demographic change. And transformation is far more complex than that. It's far more nuanced than just demographic change. It's about institutional culture. It is about belonging. It's about how systematic institutional racism permeates the very structure of the university. So for me, it's not just about access, not just about changing the demographic nature of what happens in a university space, because access without support does not equal success. So it just further marginalizes, it further isolates. So essentially what we find is when you give access without supporting in the system, the university space struggles with epistemic violence. It struggles with othering, social dislocation, traumas, and all these logics of the neoliberal logics of competition, casualization, unequal power relations just replicate itself within the system. So transformation, as I said, cannot be about demographic change. And that demographic conversation is what has masked the real conversation, which is about interrogating the apartheid institutional cultures, the politics of knowledge, about actually working with epistemic decolonization and the promotion of plurality of knowledges. So yeah, Savo, I'm gonna hand over to you.
Thank you. So one of the key things we tried to do in this paper was to critically engage with the two what we see as the two main ideologies that have impacted the higher education sector, or the transformation in the higher education sector in the post-apartheid period. The first one is the Rainbow Nation ideology, and the second one is neoliberalism. Isha is going to speak about neoliberalism in a moment. But what we also did in this paper was, we're not the first ones to write about the Rainbow Nation and higher education, or the myths linked to the Rainbow Nation ideology. We are also not the first ones to write about neoliberalism in higher education. But what we, to our knowledge, are the first to do is to bring these two together, and then to interrogate these two together, and also to reflect on some of the key policy documents in higher education, and see how these two ideologies, so how the way that the society in post-apartheid period and the universities in the post-apartheid period have approached the process of transformation, decolonization, And you know, to what extent was this prioritized by the institutions, by academia, or the government, and all that? So so we bring these two ideologies, you know, one a global ideology, one very specifically South African ideology, to showcase what they were about, or what they are about, and also to showcase the ways that they have shaped the what, you know, people call the transformation project, the transitional period, or the transition from apartheid to democracy. And the Rainbow Nation is such an important ideology. You know, and yes, I mean, you know, we don't see necessarily many people don't see the Rainbow Nation as an ideology, but you know, many people do, many scholars do, and so we engage with it as an ideological project to that was aimed at moving on from colonialism and apartheid in South Africa, and creating this you know, new democratic, transformed, unified country. These are all the ideals that are part of the Rainbow Nation ideology, and they, on their own, they're not wrong ideals. A unified, democratic, free society where there is no racial or any other form of discrimination is an ideal that, you know, everybody should stand behind. But the problem with the Rainbow Nation ideology has been that it has tried to do all this to create, you know, to get to a democratic, unified South Africa by forgetting and or hiding the past, horrific past, and moving on without redress, justice, or, you know, people who are responsible for the horrific crimes against humanity, and people who have benefited from centuries of looting and all kinds of crimes that were committed in South Africa, to just move on without giving up anything, any of the loot that they have, you know, acquired through all this, through racism, white supremacy, colonialism, apartheid, and everything else. And so, you know, we look at the Rainbow Nation broadly in the way that it has been set up to try and move on without redress, without justice, without, you know, accountability and all that. And then we zoom in and try to see to what extent and how the Rainbow Nation ideology has been used in higher education. And to a large extent, what we see and what a number of scholars have written about, and the way that they also show it, what is very important is that the Rainbow Nation ideology has been one of the key ways of you know, trying to move on and talk about transformation in higher education in South Africa without necessarily engaging critically with horrific past, and also engaging critically with the ways that universities have been part and parcel of white supremacy, of land theft, of benefiting from blood, literally blood money, you know, and being a key institution in propagation of colonialism, apartheid, white supremacy, racism, all the horrific ills that South Africa has experienced for centuries. And one important thing that is really, you know, an illustration of how all this has been to a large extent by design. And I still struggle to this day to find colleagues in South African higher education who even know that during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission processes and proceedings that happened, you know, just after the end of apartheid, between 96 and 98, many South African sectors were part of these, you know, proceedings, and people had to come and, you know, speak about the crimes that they committed. The victims were able to tell their stories. To a large extent, this process was very incomplete, and there are so many shortcomings of the process itself, and we reflect on that in the paper. But one of the few sectors that was allowed not to appear, didn't have to show up and appear and answer any of the questions that other sectors had to answer, was higher education. And this is really horrific because in other hearings about some of the most horrific crimes that happened in South Africa during apartheid, higher education was mentioned as part of the crimes. And I don't know how many people here know about Project Coast. One other current project that I'm working on, research project, took me into really dark spaces, looking at how in the 1980s, Project Coast was this secret project for development of biological and chemical weapons to kill Black people, to prevent Black women from having children, to kill anti-apartheid activists. And historically white universities, particularly Afrikaans universities, were part and parcel of providing labs, providing capacity, working with the people who were running this project to develop these banned weapons and poisons to kill anti-apartheid activists and Black people. And this was raised in the TRC proceedings. To this day, nobody in South African higher education, nobody in the government said, okay, but maybe we need to know more. And there are books. I mean, I've read books now and articles, and everything is in public domain. But this is yet another way of, let's forget about the past. Let's forget about who we are, like what we were, particularly at historically white universities in South Africa, and just move on for the sake of this kumbaya, national unity, blah, 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 all those different things. They use the same things in sports and stuff like that in South Africa, and then, just pretend that everything is going to be fine. And one last point I wanted to make is that luckily we had Black student activists. They've been calling it out for a very long time, not just in 2015 and 2016, but it was 2015, 2016, 10 years ago, that this really became a rallying cry to start to organize. And to a large extent, we owe them so much in terms of this thing still being a priority we talk about today is because of what happened 10 years ago.
Thanks, Savo. I think the resistance is an important one, because what the Fees Must Fall did was it also brought to the fore these hidden neoliberal logics that existed in this space, but were actually not dealt with and spoken about outwardly. So the students, yes, it was Fees Must Fall, but they tackled key issues within the university system as well, that actually was eating at the system. And so I guess Savo's looked at the Rainbow Nation ideology, and I'm going to speak a little bit to the neoliberal university and the neoliberal logics, because we can't talk about the lack of epistemic decolonization without engaging critically with what neoliberalism has done and how it's shaped not just the higher education sector and the university sector, but how it's shaped our country at large, the policies and the various departments. So I think despite the end of formal colonialism and apartheid, capitalism through this neoliberal project and the Eurocentric ideologies and hegemony constantly shape and influence South African society, our economy, our higher education systems. And so in the anti-apartheid struggle, yes, we had these progressive and emancipatory ideas and visions of what we wanted higher education to be, where we interrogate our racist past, but we've been chatting about how we feel that in the mid-90s, they lost ground to this. They lost ground to the conceptualization of universities as sites of global knowledge economies. So essentially what happened is we started producing skills for the market. So instead of contributing to fundamental change in society, universities became servants to a capitalist neoliberal market. And it was shaped by class, racism, patriarchy, all these other social fractures that have been eating at our society. And I think, as I've just been saying, it's really important to situate the neoliberal university within the South African, or in South Africa, within the agenda of the post-apartheid government. So this government embraced neoliberalism when it came into power. It drove its policies, its priorities, and Savo will speak to this a little bit later when he speaks to the DHET policy. But essentially, it became really impossible for even progressive universities to escape the market debasement of higher education because of this. And I think just an interesting share is when we first submitted our paper for review, we got a comment back from one of the reviewers who said that we have an unrealistic expectation of government to not be a neoliberal institution. And we sat for a while debating this because we were like, are we wrong? Are we not meant to have this expectation? And then Savo went back and he's like, no, we have to actually understand. He's like, we can't just be making this up. And he went back and he dug up a white paper. I think it was, what is it, the 1997 white paper. I'm just gonna look at yes, and he found a quotation which said that in this white paper, it says, it stressed that the government had a responsibility to ensure the public accountability of institutions when it comes to curriculum and research transformation and diversification. So essentially, when the turn to democracy happened, there was a white paper commitment to the fact that government and state had accountability to ensure that this is what happened across the space. So we can hold government accountable. But what we find is that the neoliberal market logic just became the norm. So there was underfunding of higher education systems, which forced institutions to increase their tuitions. They transformed into corporate entities, and they were rather focused on producing and selling knowledge for economic gain, and graduates entering the market space. And so it became a competition base where you were seeking other sources of funding. So instead of it actually holding the ground for knowledge production and social justice transformation, it became another competitor in this, as Nancy Fraser puts it, cannibal capitalistic society that we exist in. So yeah, neoliberalism has seen higher education as a commodity, a space where the marketplace just produces universities and academics who are in the business of selling our educational products to customers, our students, just to help them get employment. So I think what is really important for us to understand is that neoliberalization of higher education has undermined and it's prevented epistemic transformation because the focus of university leaders and administrators.
So you have 5
sorry?
minutes remaining. 5 minutes remaining.
Okay, cool, thanks.
5 minutes remaining. Okay.
Okay. Yes, I'm gonna just tie up this section so Savo can get to the part on DHET. I think our main part about actually holding both the Rainbow Nation ideology and the neoliberal logic is for us to understand that these two logics became, or it was used, and it became the narratives for universities to survive. So often this was at the expense of social justice agendas. And in the interest of time, we can get to understanding this a little bit more, unpacking this a bit more in the Q&As, but I'm going to ask Savo to quickly go through to looking at the DHET policy, and then we'll come with some of our ideas and thoughts for the future as well.
Yeah, I love reading policy documents. It's I don't want to say it's fun, but it in a way it is, because you can really get a sense of what the, whoever it is, governments or whoever it is, what are their visions, what are they focusing on, what are they prioritizing, what are they not prioritizing. And as part of this paper, we engaged with DHET's strategic plan for the years 2020-2025. It's a very important document, I fear that very often we in higher education don't necessarily engage critically with these policy documents to see what exactly they're talking about. They're big, long documents. They talk about all kinds of things, but they are really important messages that we can find in these documents. And so I remember reading that document for the first time and being really kind of like shocked and using the search option in PDF to really see. I mean, I wanted to understand, what are the strategic priorities for this 5-6 year period. We kind of exiting that the document's focus now, and the document itself, you can read in the paper. We talk about it in a lot of detail. The document, the DHET strategic plan, reads as a very neoliberal document. I mean, it speaks about the purpose of higher education in South Africa is to develop the skills and skilled individuals for the marketplace. I mean, people in the World Bank in Washington, D.C. would be so happy and proud to see this. I mean, it's the more kind of like the ultimate of the toxicity, the neoliberal toxicity that you can read in this document itself. And there is no, I mean, we're not saying, and we talk about that in the paper, we're not saying that we don't need quality education and the skills for young people and all kinds of other things, and expanding access and all that. But the purpose of higher education cannot be just to develop the skills for the local and global marketplace and the capitalist economic system and all that. So that's one side. It's a very neoliberal speak document. And in the original version of the document, decolonization was mentioned only once in one of the figures, basically as a footnote. So there is no vision. It's not a priority. There is no what, why, how. There is no expectation that the universities should be focusing on this. None of that. Decolonization was basically a possible outcome of other activities that the universities get involved in this period. And so we initially submitted the paper, and the title was supposed to be Decolonization is a Footnote. And during the review process, we got the reviews, and for some reason I went back to the document, and I didn't go back to my PDF. I went to search for it online, and I saw that there was a revised version of this document. And I thought, I really need to see they don't provide any explanation, kind of like a cover page to say what is changed in the revision. And so I had to read it again and look at it. And, the thing that was really interesting to see was that all the neoliberal speak from the original strategic plan was there. The one thing that is missing is even that footnote where decolonization is mentioned. So basically, somebody somewhere at DHET decided that even that decolonization as a footnote, just a footnote, no priority whatsoever, needed to be removed. And that's where we are. And one last thing I wanted to mention, we really think that some vision from the government is important to showcase to the public higher education sector that this should be a priority. We know that the neoliberal university in South Africa does what it needs to do to tick boxes. It's performance management, it's all kinds of other things. They have to report on things. So they're going to, a lot of times it's going to be decolonial washing, but it maybe might force things to happen even in that decolonial washing fashion. But when you don't prioritize it as the government, when you don't even have it as a footnote, what are you saying to the institutions that don't really care about this unless they are pushed in some direction by the government itself? And what we have found in this research is that very much, those two ideologies continue to shape higher education in South Africa, even the policy making on the higher education level in the government. There is no talk about the past. There is no talk about colonialism, apartheid, the impact of all this on higher education. It's just about developing the skills for the marketplace.
Thanks, Savo. Arina, I think we may be on time, but I'm just going to ask for 2 minutes more so I can just quickly offer you some thoughts about the final section in our paper. So I think Savo and I, when we wrote up these sections, we sat there very despondent and going, well, is it all doom and gloom? Are we in a portal of despair right now? But I think we were left grappling with what does it take for decolonization to become more than a buzzword right now? Those were the questions we were faced with. So how do we get epistemic decolonization to be at the center of government's thought processes, DHET's thought processes, strategic institutional planning as well? And I think when we ask ourselves, can universities be decolonized? That was the main question we kept coming back to. And I think we said that, South Africa needs more critical scholarship. We need more engagements with the coloniality of knowledge, of Eurocentrism, the curriculum decolonization, tackling neoliberalization, this commodification. And this needs to happen through organizing critical engagements within universities, between academics, researchers, students, staffs, and also between university communities and broader society. And I think here I always come back to Robin Kelly's quote, and I think both Savo and I really love this quote, where Robin Kelly says, you can be in the university, but you do not have to be of the university. And I think that's so important, that we cannot just say, well, we've given up on the institution. No, you can exist within the institution, but resist from within the university as well. So I think we started thinking about, what does resistance mean? So yes, you need to resist from within. We also started thinking about the fact that engagements need to be cross-border. It needs to happen within Southern Africa, across the continent, with the rest of the global South, with indigenous people, immigrant communities. We need to link with progressive scholars, but at the same time, we also need to link to global scholars in the global North as well, because this struggle against coloniality, neo-colonialism, white supremacy, capitalism, it is a common thing that we're all challenged with at the moment. So when it comes for the struggle, the one thing we referred to towards the end of our paper was Walsh's call for the expansion. Sure. Was Walsh's call for the expansion for decolonial scholarship and praxis to grow at the fissures and cracks. And that was something we played out, where resistance needs to happen from the university, and you keep cracking at each crack within the space. And that's the only way we are able to actually disrupt the whole system. So I think for us, as despondent as it sounds, because there's a lack of political will within the government and institutions to change, we have to resist. And that's where hope lies for us, from constantly resisting, from coming together in solidarity, and from speaking back to the system in every single action. Yeah, thanks, colleagues. I think we're far over our time, but we're happy to engage with questions a little later. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Savo and Isha. Now I will hand over to Prof. Mlamuli, our discussant. Prof, you have 10 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, firstly, colleagues, for this opportunity. I always say this, that I'm a big fan of Savo, so it's a little bit unfair that I have to I'll be a respondent to his paper, because I just think everything he does is always amazing. So that's just me. It is an amazing paper what Isha and Savo did, and I like the structure of it. But I think at a deeper level, colleagues, and you don't explicitly mention this in the paper itself, is that you are beginning to respond to a critique that a lot of us have been leveled at, a lot of us, to say that reimagining decolonization, or reimagining the public university, or the decolonial or the post-neoliberal university, if you like, Savo and Isha, without contending with state power is almost meaningless. And I think those are the real questions that we are grappling, a lot of us, in our own work, because we always conceptualize of the university as outside of society, as outside of the state. And what you are really grappling with is to say that the DHEHD stretch plan for 2020 all the way till 2025 does indicate implicitly or explicitly some of the policy priorities of the sector, and why I think decolonization remains so premature, if you like, so frustrated, if you like. I appreciated the early roots of the South African higher education, and I completely agree with you that the neoliberalism has always been with us. It never left us. It never left us. And you trace it quite nicely from the early 1990s with some of the concerns that Salim Patat at that time, Andre Keat at that time, Wally Moro at that time. It's not the fall is concerned. I mean, these are all debates that they are raising, but it's to show you that at least at a policy level, you identified two brilliant policies. It's both the Education White Paper 3 of 1997, as well as the 2013 White Paper for Post-School Education and Training. Going forward, colleague, I want you to also contend with the 2015 Staffing Universities framework, because I think for me, that is a seminal policy document that articulates the vision of the country around the next generation of emerging scholars and academics, right? It gets tabled by the then Minister of DHED, Dr. Blade Nzimande, as a vision, right? This is what we think around attracting the next generation, right? Because Blade was much more blunt, right? We've got an aging white professoriate, particularly within the associate professor and full professor level, and we need this young emerging cadre of young Black academics who are going to succeed them. But even there, Isha and Savo, even there, it's quite clear that he doesn't give a damn about decolonization. You are absolutely right, Isha. Conception of transformation, to simplify, it's a numbers game, right? If we respond to the numbers, and then hopefully some material transformation would occur. So even at the elite, because what makes the staffing universities, staffing South Africa's university framework so important is that sort of becomes the policy architecture, if you like. That then includes your NEST program, your Nurturing Emerging Scholars program run at Wits University. I think it's Dr. Mendi Hlengwa over there. You've got your NCAP scholars who are part of it. I think you've got recently your Future Professors program. So that becomes your integrated national policy framework that I think you could do, again, that decolonial discourse analysis that you were doing, to say, even at the way in which we conceptualize the emerging and new generation of Black scholars and Black academics in the country, the neoliberal logics are still with us and they are not going away. Absolutely spot on around the relationship between the rainbow people of God, right? That's Desmond Tutu's words, okay, in the 80s and towards the early 1990s, the rainbow nation of God. But I want to take it a little bit further, colleagues, to say it is the use, misuse, and abuse of this theological conception of social justice in the world that facilitates this Mandelian reconciliation, right? That gives birth to the Mandelian conceptions of reconciliation, where Black pain and Black traumas and Black bodies have to lie down and sacrifice themselves. And then we have to move on without restitution, without structural reconfiguration, without rethinking the purpose and the value of higher education, without reconfiguring the economy, without reimagining our political architecture in the country. So it's the rainbow nation of God, with Tutu at that time prostituting, if you like, the theological gospel of the word, to say that Blacks, therefore, must sacrifice themselves, lay themselves at the altar of forgiveness, compassion, right, and mercy, essentially, so that it can give birth to these fictitious country, right? Fictitious political experiment that we have in South Africa, to say that therefore the Mandelian conceptions of justice and reconciliation are therefore acceptable, because to be Black is to be inherently defective, is to forgive, and things like that. And to some extent, we are struggling with that, right? At the moment, you can see the resistance. So it's not just the critique of the ruling countries, the critique of the political experiment in South Africa, and some of the blatant statement to say it was better under apartheid. At least they were not stealing as much. These guys are stealing and things like that. So all of that can be located and traced back to those Mandelian conceptions and the challenges that we are facing as well. But I also want to extend a little bit more around the neoliberalism, Isha, in higher education, to say it's deeper than that. We also have those ratings, those rankings, those performance management, the managerialism, the corporate colonization of the logic of higher education. And you see that, I mean, I sit on the board of the Council on Higher Education for the Research and Monitoring Advisory Committee. What is our biggest topic at the moment? It's around issues of micro-credentialing and things like that, where it's about the private sector dictating those skills, those applied skills that are required by the corporate community, so that we can change curriculum, repackage it, and sell it back to that. So that's why micro-credentialing is the big buzzword. It was a big buzzword in Germany, it's a big buzzword in the UK, it's a big buzzword in SA at the moment. And the dangers of that, in conclusion, colleagues, is not necessarily the fact that the corporate community are requesting what ought to be studied. For me, it's them shifting the discourse around what counts as valid and legitimate knowledge. And for me, that's far more terrifying, to simply say the epistemic inequality that gets produced and reproduced regarding the corporate skills that are required and the skills that are not required and that are useless. And there you're beginning to see the inequality. They don't give a damn about fascism. They don't give a damn about global solidarity. They don't give a damn about democratic theory, resistance, dissidence, reimagining global citizenship, and all those other questions. They don't give a damn about that. They are concerned about ChatGPT. They are concerned about DeepSeek. They are concerned about AI, smart technologies. They are concerned about business ethics and those other things. That's what they are shifting. That's what they are pumping money on. and the inequality that gets produced, as well as the valuing of particular sets of knowledge that could be packaged, sold, and repackaged and sold back to the marketplace, for me is equally quite damaging going forward. Colleagues, I'm going to stop there, but it is a brilliant paper, and I think I will end with the way I started to say that it is impossible to discuss the transformation of the higher education sector in the absence of grappling with the state itself, whether it's the purpose of the state, whether it's the developmental state, or whether it's how the state thinks of itself in relation to transformation and how the state responds to some of those decolonial imperatives. Thank you so much, colleagues. Lovely paper, and I look forward to learning and listening to the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Mlamuli. Now I'll open the floor for questions. I'll take questions in round of 3. So I'll take 3 people, and then we'll allow our presenters to respond. Any questions or comments? Fenella? I'll take the first.
Savo and Isha, thank you so much for a very depressing presentation, but very real and absolutely true. I think I'm not sure I'm going to be able to write my question well, because this needs so much sort of absorbing and processing. But I think sort of at a superficial level, I'll ask, I think that's an amazing quote from Walsh about chipping away at the fissures and cracks. And I'm interested to know where you see some of those fissures and cracks that can be chipped away at. And then I'll also, this isn't even a question really, because the context also is so reinforces the situation in the country with graduate unemployment. And so it actually suits students to have this neoliberal orientation, because that's become the key reason for going to higher education. And I wonder how we flip that, because part of the challenge also is to address the decoloniality, and at the same time provide for the social mobility that students are desperate for in their lives.
Thank you, Fenella. Prof. Nika, your hand was up.
Thanks, Arina. Thank you, Savo and Isha. I was wondering about the analysis, the discourse analysis that you did, and whether you were looking for an explicit mention of the term decolonization, or if you were considering instances of it being mentioned implicitly. And if you did look specifically for a clear use of the word, why would it matter that you're reading it explicitly rather than kind of reading between the lines, perhaps where there are discussions on transformation and so on? So it's just about understanding your reading of these documents and the explicit mention of decolonization.
Thank you, Prof. Nika. Any question before I allow our presenters to respond? Okay, maybe I will allow our presenters to respond to the questions as people are gathering their thoughts. Over to you.
Isha, do you want me to go first? Can I respond to the second question? It's a very, very, very important question, we looked at the different forms of the transformation speak, if I can put it that way. So since 1997, we looked at, you know, the language and the use of language and the way the transformation has been framed and all that. You know, we understood that, you know, in 2007, 1997 document, in 2008 document, in 2013, we didn't expect to see any mention of decolonization or anything like that, because, you know, it wasn't the terminology that was popular at a time. We did expect to see some of it in 2020, and we did see it as a footnote. But what we also looked at, you know, the use of terminology beyond, you know, the exact use of this one term. What we found in the 2020 document, and in the previous policy document, they speak about the transformation, the redress, you know, addressing the past injustices and all kinds of other things. And even that language of addressing the past injustices disappears by 2020. So the past almost disappears completely from the document. It's about the numbers, as Isha was talking about. It's about the numbers game. You know, it's about, you know, graduating more students. It's about, you know, graduating more students with the skills for the marketplace and all kinds of other things. One thing that is also very important is that, and we talk about it in the paper itself, you know, the challenges facing the South African higher education system are, and this was really, I mean, apart from not seeing decolonization there, this was really shocking, is that the calls for transformation of the curriculum and transformation of language policies in South African higher education. For example, you know, we are indigenous languages. Why only the colonial languages in South African higher education, and things like that are seen as challenges and pressures and not the opportunities. So these are seen as almost like problems. The students are demanding the transformation of the curriculum. You know, we need to deal with that. We're not seeing that as an opportunity to transform, to get to where we need to be. It's seen as a pressure on an already fragile system. And so our reading was far more kind of open-minded than just, you know, there's no mention. I mean, you know, we tried to do this talk in 20-25 minutes. You know, we already went overboard, but you know, we couldn't kind of talk about every single little detail. But it's such an important actually question. Almost like somebody needs to do a whole PhD just on that, on what are we looking for when we're reading these documents. And we were looking for, yes, we were looking in 2020, we're looking for the term decolonization or coloniality. We were looking for any engagement with the historical and contemporary complexities linked to colonialism and apartheid in South African higher education. None of that is there. It's just the neoliberal speak. And at some point, somebody decided to even that one superficial mention of decolonization as a footnote, to remove that even completely. So that was something that was quite telling for us. And we don't know who that is. We don't know when that decision was made. We don't know the explanation behind it, because as I said, that explanation is not provided in the policy document itself. But it's quite telling that that was done.
Yeah. Thanks, Savo. So I'm gonna attempt answering the first questions. I think it's a big, important question that I think we're all grappling with right now. Where are those spaces to chip at those cracks and fissures? And Savo and I have had lengthy conversations about this. We're actually working on a book chapter at the moment, post this paper, looking at exactly that. How do we imagine this decolonized university? And I think the way we see it is the cracks and fissures, they're at multi-levels. So I think it starts at an individual level. It starts at a staff support level. It starts at academic level. you enter the space and you're meant to support. So a biggest example that we've been talking about is when the student activism happened and you had the resistance movements. Who were the people who supported this call? So Fees Must Fall happened, these calls happened, we resisted in a moment in time. But how did we support the ask post that period in time? Is it just ruptures that we have? Is it just moments of impact? Or do we take these discourses forward? And I think the responsibility falls to us all within the system. It falls to us as academics within the system to constantly resist and speak back. So how do you teach? How do you design your curriculum? What do you put in your curriculum? What sort of engagement do you have? How do you reform your spaces? So I think there's a teaching and learning aspect to it. There's a research aspect to it. So when you talk about research, this is my big area of passion, is collaborations, internationalization. Who are we partnering with? What are the power dynamics? What does this look like with the global North and South? I think decolonizing and cracks and fissures speak to multi-levels across the university. And I think it's really difficult to answer in one succinct way right now. But I think these are some of the spaces where I think we can speak back. University leaders, I think we can't be diplomatic. We need to actually have a stance. You need to enter, you need to say, actually, our strategic documents need to insert decolonization. How do we change people and culture? It's easy to diversify a space, but let people not feel like they belong, take away their voice, still marginalize them with that institutional racism that exists. So I think speaking back is chipping at every point where you have the opportunity to resist. I think that's sort of the idea, the overarching idea that we're playing with. And I mean, it's a broader discussion. I'm not going to take up too much more time. And I think the second question you asked was something about, what about students who want the neoliberal university because it gives them social mobility? And I think my question to that is, well, which students want that? Because the neoliberal university, obviously you need access and it supports a particular type of student to succeed in that environment. And I often think of Bourdieu's ideas of the various capitals you come with, right? So you come with cultural capital, social capital, etc. And I think those capitals give you mobility. So what we're trying to do is, we're not saying, no, you shouldn't have mobility and the university shouldn't be a space to actually grow. We're saying it should be, but it needs to be balanced with the social justice agenda. Who are you giving access to? Is it equitable access? It's about who you allow into the space. So I think, yes, social mobility is important, and the neoliberal moment is, it speaks to the agendas or the aspirations of a particular kind of student, and that's what we're trying to fight against, because we're saying it shouldn't only give access or mobility to a particular kind, it should be across the board. So yeah, in a very short space to try to tackle those questions.
Thank you so much for that. So I'll take the next round of questions. I see Prof. Walker, your hand is up. Prof. Melanie, you're on mute.
Thanks very much, Rina. And thank you very much to Savo and Isha for your presentation. I've not read the paper, but I've downloaded it and I'll read it afterwards. I think I've got some comments rather than questions. So I suppose the one comment is around demographics. And I agree with you. It's not just about the numbers, but it is also about the numbers, because if the numbers hadn't shifted in the way that they do, we would be having a very different conversation. So I don't want to be a defendant for DHET. I have as many problems with DHET as you do. But in a sense, their argument about redress in 1997 has borne some kind of fruit. So all I'm really saying is, let's acknowledge that it is about the numbers, but it's not only about the numbers, and see that those numbers do make a difference. And they do also tell us that places like UCT, Stellenbosch in particular, that their numbers are still very problematic. So those numbers are still telling us something. So that's really just the first comment. The second comment is about the policy analysis, which I think is very, very interesting. Many, many years ago, I think it was back in the 90s, Stephen Ball wrote a very interesting paper about policy as text and policy as discourse, and made what I think is quite an important point, which is that policy doesn't enter a blank space, that it articulates with other policies and so on. So it does seem important, and Savo, you've done this, to look at the sort of run of policy in DHET terms since 1997. And the challenge with only analyzing the document is it doesn't give you access to who, why, and how were these policy decisions made. So is it the case, for example, that people making the policy for 2020, it might be the case, it possibly isn't, but it might be the case. And I think this speaks to Fenella's, or was it Mika's point about, were you looking for decolonization as an explicit discourse in the policy documents or implicit? It might be that decisions were made around, well, some of these things have been realized, so we don't have to keep saying them. So you really have to keep reading the policy documents as a run, and then you need to be able to speak to the people who are making the policy and why they make it in the way that they do, and how it's articulating with other policies around social development, economic development, and so on, because higher education doesn't stand on its own. These policies are articulating with other elements of what the state has to say. So that was the second comment, and then I had a third comment which I've lost. So I'll just leave it there, I think, as those two comments. So I think the approach is really interesting. But yeah, I mean, Isha, you starting to talk about this. We need also to get to the nitty-gritty of how does this actually work out in practice, because there's a danger of homogenizing the system and homogenizing students. There are undoubtedly a lot of students from our research who precisely want they wouldn't call it the neoliberal university, but they're at university because they want to get a job. They come from very low income homes. They come from rural backgrounds. They tend to be neglected in policy debates, discourses, big picture accounts, and so on. So I don't think it's necessarily the case that, to say, well, which are the students? Well, we can point you to a lot of these students. And what it is that they say that they want from the university, and they're not necessarily, being critical beyond that. So I think it's very, very interesting, and really those are just comments rather than questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Melanie. And it seems our time is up. So if there are any burning questions, we can continue to engage with the presenters even after the session. But for now, I will just hand over to our presenters to quickly respond to Prof. Melanie, and if they have any concluding remarks. Over to you.
Thank you. Can I, Melanie? I just wanted to try and respond. I mean, your points are spot on. We in the paper itself, we don't say that demographic changes and the numbers game is a problem, but we are saying that that is seen as the main, not the only, but the main priority. One thing I wanted to say is that at least on the higher education level, we should be able to focus on more than one thing at a time. And I think we should, again, Isha was talking about this, we should have an expectation from the government to also be able to focus on a number of things, including the complex ones. And we want them to be able to speak about the complex issues, and to create a vision for the complex issues and things. So that's the one thing. I fully agree with you. I mean, again, it's almost like a PhD topic. There was just so much we could do in one paper, and we could do, the engagement with the policy documents as they are. As I said in the talk earlier, we would love to be able to find out what and how decisions were made. And for example, why was it removed in the revised document? If we could find out some way that somebody can talk to us, we'd love to do that. And that's a whole other research project. And, you know, one thing that we really, you know, if you ask us, so were you really expecting to see a mention of decolonization or anything resembling epistemic decolonization in the 2020 document? We really did expect to see it because, you know, it became a buzzword. It became this supposed priority. One of the HEHD commissioned reports, that comprehensive report about the transformation in South African higher education, speaks about that after fees must fall and roads must fall, South African higher education entered this deep transformation space where the focus is on epistemic decolonization. But that didn't reach official policy documents at HEHD. And so, you know, how is it possible that South African decolonial turn can inspire many settings around the world, similar struggles around the world? Literally, fees must fall and roads must fall inspired many other places and the students and academia in many other parts of the world to kind of rekindle that struggle for epistemic decolonization. But it doesn't reach Pretoria. It cannot reach Pretoria. There is a big wall in Pretoria. It doesn't get to them. So I think our paper, my last comment is, our paper really pushes us and hopefully others to see what is it that we didn't get to, as you mentioned. What is it that you didn't have access to? And hopefully somebody will say, okay, how do we get to people and ask them, you know, the thought processes in coming up with these. And I think this is also important. I don't know who can figure it out, but this policy document is ending in 2025 officially. And something else is probably in the process of being written as we speak, or maybe it's finalized. And I'm hoping that there's a bit more vision, that substantial vision on where the system needs to go in whatever is to come after this.
Thanks, Savo. Thanks, Melanie. I think you make some really important points, and I completely agree that the numbers are extremely important because we need the demographic change. But I think the most important thing is that the numbers and the demographic change got used as the end point. That's all we need to change for decolonization and transformation. And there wasn't a commitment to dig deeper. And I think the reason I think we're both so passionate about this, but my PhD work is actually looking at access with student policy. So I'm looking at admission policies as well, what has changed. And I think that's where I find that the numbers are problematic, because in certain programs, there's demographic change. But when you ask what else do you need in order to succeed in a system, access isn't just enough. So you have to provide access with the and the and is what has been missing in the conversation. I think we're still grappling with that, and I think we're trying to point us into a direction by saying that yes, numbers are important, but it is not the end story, and there's so much more work that needs to be done beyond that. And I think, I mean, I often tell the story of a student who enters the system and she's given access based on social disadvantage or scoring, etc. But she enters the space only being set up to fail, because she doesn't come with the social mobility or the background to support her success in that space. She isn't given a voice in a white-dominated classroom, for example, or a white-dominated discipline that she enters. She goes back home to very different circumstances. So I think resourcing, and this speaks to Malumi's point about the fact that we cannot see the university in isolation from society. As you can't see the university in isolation from the state, it's the same with the socioeconomic conditions that we come from. So we can't see students as dislocated from the societies and the disadvantages they enter the space with as well. And I think that's what I'm just trying to get at, with the fact that there's so much more work we need to do beyond the numbers. And the other thing about, I'm not going to get into the policy part and the missing piece, because Savo spoke a lot to that, but I just wanted to speak to, I think the idea of, where you say they ask students who want the neoliberal university. I think we're placing it as a dichotomy right now. We're making it the neoliberal university versus decolonization, but I don't think it's as simplistic as that. I think, yes, we need to help with access and transformation and getting social mobility and getting jobs, because yes, changing the job market, giving them access to the job market also helps with poverty reduction. It's a whole link. I hear that. But we can't also negate the fact that we need to deal with the decolonization issues. I think there are things that happen simultaneously within the system. So it's a bit of a complex and nuanced relationship. It's not a either or. I think we need to start thinking about how do we insert the decolonization conversation. And I know decolonization is a heavy word because it encompasses so much right now. But we need to start thinking about transformation and decolonization alongside how it sits in the neoliberal university, where the neoliberal university isn't the dictator, but actually decolonization is the dictator within the neoliberal space. So yeah, but thanks, colleagues. We really do appreciate the engagements and the conversation and pushing us to think further about this.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Isha. It seems like we have kept people more than we anticipated. Thank you so much to our presenters for quite an insightful and thought-provoking presentation. Thank you. And thanks, colleagues, for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.